welcome to another very promising, courageous conversation. We're talking about a very unpleasant topic: mental health. The pandemic may not have caused it, but the COVID pandemic has probably accentuated it because there's so many sources building up over the years: terrorism, unemployment, financial struggle that have actually caused this trauma to increase. And it's closer than you think. More people around you are suffering from mental health issues than ever before in history. And we're talking to Dr. Anil Cherian, who has done some valid research in this subject. And thank you very much and welcome to the studios, Anil Cherian. And I just want to know from you, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, someone who's dealing with this, what is the scale of this problem?
Yeah, I recently wrote an article, so let me read it to you
Sure.
from there. So, what the research shows is that there are nearly 1 billion people.
A billion in the whole world.
Yeah, this is in the whole world who are suffering from some mental illness. This is the global statistics. But what people need to understand is it's not a medical problem. Actually, it's an impact of trauma on a global scale. And when we say trauma, it's war, conflict. There's a lot of torture, terrorism, and different forms of abuse and violence. So we have, sexual abuse, gender-based violence, and this has been growing all over the world. And the result has been that they say that 1 in 7 people have experienced some form of trauma. So we have all these huge societal issues undergirding this. And the result has been that most people end up with some kind of post-traumatic syndrome, stress disorders, and some even have major mental illness. And this is affecting most of us. The World Health Organization says that it's going to be the number 1 disease burden in the world soon. And so this is something that we should all be aware of and concerned about.
The number 1 disease burden in the world, something that we can't ignore anymore. I'm so glad that we have you to talk about it. But first, am I generalizing when I say mental health? Is it an umbrella that covers various kinds of issues? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that everyone needs to be put into a mental health hospital. Most of the disorders are usually referred to as common mental disorders. So they're like anxiety and stress related. Most of them are stress related. And they're basically because of the economic situation that we face and the hardships that people face. The wars, the conflict, the displacement that's happening. I came across a statistic which says that there are something like 34 million people who have been displaced from their homes. And we know that there are many fragile countries. Most of the African nations are fragile, but we also have Syria, Yemen, and many parts of the world.
Absolutely.
And people are, there are generations which have lived only in refugee camps. That came as a shock to me. I visited some of these refugee camps. There are like hundreds and thousands of people. Their grandchildren have grown up in the same refugee camp and they don't know any country. They have no country. There are people without a nation or a country. So much of the world is actually hurting today. And while we see a whole process of globalization and nations coming up, and we are so excited by all the development, what we don't see is there's a layer below that, and there's a whole nation. 34 million is not a small number. It's
as big as a country by itself.
Exactly.
And this is very startling when you said so tellingly, not just their children, but their children's children also growing up in this refugee camp. What a scale of trauma and displacement. That's really remarkable. Now, you did some research of mental health in rural India, but you also say that it's not just a rural problem and not just a rural India problem, but it might be closer than we think. That there may be people just round the corner who don't have access to healthcare, even in the most modern of cities, and silently going through a most terrible time of mental depression and mental health.
Yeah, what startled me even when I was working in North India, I worked in a place called Chhatarpur in Madhya Pradesh, is the amount of human displacement, the migration. And recently the pandemic has brought that to light. We don't realize, you'll be living in Hyderabad, but hundreds and thousands of people are migrating from rural areas to support an ecosystem in a city like Hyderabad, right? And
Exactly.
most of them benefit from this. So I know they're actually rural families, rural farmers, and because of the issues of climate change, agriculture is failing in many parts of India. So I remember sitting in Jhansi railway station. The station is packed with people migrating, and that's something we never realized. It struck me. I was sitting one day and I saw the scene where a train comes and a mother was sleeping. She gets up and runs and she forgets a small baby on the platform.
You actually saw that
I
happening.
saw that happening in front of my, and then she ran back. She suddenly realized before she was getting into the train that she had left her baby behind, and she came back running. And people have been sold. Human trafficking is another big issue that we know in India, and I've also worked on that area. So there are millions of girls going from Jharkhand, for example, to New Delhi and working in them as maids, and there's also sex trafficking and many other issues. So we're really working in a traumatized world, and a lot of it has to do with our economy and the way our modern world functions. So this is a very complex situation. At the same time, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the so-called medical business complex. Medicine has almost become a business. Uh, I not say almost, it is. It
It
is
is a
one of the
business,
biggest
yes.
businesses.
Especially now.
It
Yes.
has the fastest return on investments, right? So everybody wants to build a hospital and earn money from it. But the problem is that this is impacting lives of people, and one of those big issues is mental health.
That's so sad. And when you said that to maintain the luxuries that we enjoy and take for granted in the city, it comes at a huge cost from the people who toil so hard to provide it. And one of the biggest casualties is their mental health goes for a toss. And that makes me feel a wave of guilt. And you also mentioned that it's almost at your doorstep now, but I'd like to say, out of personal experience and meeting so many families, even in the cities, that it's also come inside the home. And whether we realize it or not, it's affecting our own loved ones, ourselves, and our family members. And what are the symptoms for a person who may not even realize that they're having mental health issues in their home, their own home, for instance?
In the home, basically, it often translates into relational problems. And
Okay.
there are relational issues. I mean, generally we have brushed off relational issues as every house has a fight and every house has problems. But we don't realize that there must be much deeper issues and mental health issues which are unattended to. And because of the stigma of mental illness, the last thing that anyone wants to do is to go to a counselor, psychologist, or a mental health specialist. So I think we need to be aware of it, and I think it affects all of us. I mean, I agree with you totally. I mean, right in our own families, uh, and maybe even us. I mean, all of us are going through this phenomenon. We realize it or not. Life has become much more complex, much more stressful, and there are many new drivers. Technology. We know now social media is a major driver in mental illness in our homes. Uh, there's plenty of research to that extent. It's been fought in the US, the Facebook, and its impact on depression, on anorexia nervosa, and all sorts of uh, our appearances, body images, disorders. Yeah, I can just keep going, but it's definitely affecting all of us. alcoholism, substance abuse. A colleague of mine was saying that nearly 30% of the disorders are actually underlying is substance abuse and alcoholism.
So I just want to say, I may be old fashioned, I may not have kept up with the times. To me, it's still a stigma to admit that you're having mental health issues and actually go in for treatment. So, what would you advise people who are displaying some of the symptoms you talked about? What could be the next step, and what should they do?
There has to be a lot more talking, open conversations in all different forums, and people need to be aware. But also, it shouldn't be the wrong image that everyone needs to go to a mental health specialist or something. A lot of things can happen with modern ways of dealing with it. There are support groups, even groups coming and talking about it. So I think we need a lot of, I would say, non-medical interventions. In rural North India, for example, we used to form these groups called self-help groups. People know about it as micro-enterprise, and it's big in terms of the economic. But when we actually interviewed our women's groups, they said, it's not the money. Even if you are not making money, we just want to come together, sit and talk to each other, because it helps us share our troubles. Some of them are facing domestic violence at home. It's just we need somebody that we can talk to.
So, just getting like minded people itself is therapeutic.
Sure. I mean, there are many coping mechanisms. And when our traditional family systems are breaking down, we are living in, we may have family thousands of miles away, we come to a new city, we don't have support systems. We need to create and build a support system. So I think it's happening, but we can do it much more intentionally. Having friends meeting groups, games times. But if you don't do it, you'll end up with alcoholism, substance abuse, and then some serious mental disorders.
What you're saying is so amazing. You're talking about people getting together, families getting together, talking with each other. We may have lost the art of doing that. That's what we used to do in our childhood when we had no television or had no screens. So I want to ask you a very honest question. I live a life with about 16 to 18 hours or even more sometimes in front of a screen of some kind. What is the effect that it has on us?
I think that's something that we've all been caught into, this whole technology, social media sort of bubble. We didn't probably realize it. It's attractive, it drew us in, but it's something that is very highly addictive, and it's probably one of the major drivers of mental illness in today's life. And it's made life very complex, and people have suddenly become aware, they're very conscious of themselves. And I think it's time that we really seriously took stock of this. We addressed it seriously. Of course, I always say the change has to come from you. And I must confess, even I'm in the same boat as many people.
I just want to ask you, you are passionate about serving. You've spent most of your life serving in North India. And you talked about community self-help groups, getting together and all. Is this something that is we take for granted in India, but is so therapeutic, so good for mental health issues? The aunt or the uncle who used to insist that we come for family gathering, even if we have to take leave, is actually a great thing, something that we have in India. And is that something among the many other things which we as Indians can contribute to the rest of the world? And should we, in fact, have our eyes beyond India on the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think you can start initially from home. We need to be more conscious of the things that we can do every day to help people around us. There is a great need. I think much of the world is hurting. And while as Indians we have done, there have been major strides in all areas. I think today we are leaders in many of the fields.
We are. Yeah.
And that's what amazed me. When we grew up as children in Hyderabad, we never realize that we are going to be the front runners in many of the areas.
Yes.
But I think India has much more to contribute, even to addressing some of the needs of the fragile world. I call it fragile nations and or hurting nations, because there are millions of people who don't know anything better than, we teach in South Sudan. We didn't realize that most people only eat once in a day. Even our students, they can't afford to eat more.
Because of economic reasons.
Economic reasons.
Wow.
And there are basic hardship. The number of women, single women, the number of women who have experienced gender-based violence is just huge. So I think even though we are making major strides, I think it's time for us to also decide that we can make a difference.
In the NGO sector.
NGO sector is something big, but we can even move beyond to actually think of our own ways of reaching out to some of these nations. Recently, I realized that one of the biggest charities, persons giving money in the world, is actually Asim Premji from Wipro.
Yes, yes.
And he's given more, right? And he's doing some fantastic work in India. But it's time for us to even think of the rest of the world. So far, we have been very India conscious. But we have much to give even the rest of the world. And I believe that the more we do outside, even we will learn more about what we need to do within our own societies. So it works mutually. We gain a lot even as we give.
That's so true. It's time we realize that it's more blessed to give than to receive. And I think it's time as a nation we look outwards in a big way and contribute in many other ways to the world at large. I want to wrap up this conversation with something that you can personally advise, because I really feel, even from what you said, 1 in 7 persons around the world are having mental health issues. And what can we do right now? Firstly, for ourselves to be aware, and secondly, to contribute to a world that is more stable from a mental health point of view.
I think we really need to realize that at the end of the day, it's not the economic gains that are going to make life happy and
in fact,
joyful.
it goes the opposite, right?
Exactly. So we need to spend much more time on building our relationships, having open conversations, even with our own children, with our own families. And I realize that's the mistake and I made. But I think we can take up small things. I'm not talking of projects, or I'm not talking of NGO kind of work. I mean, there are many people who fall in the gaps. They're not reached by NGOs, they're neither reached by the government. And they may be right there in front of you. And for those of us who think that we would like to step out, I would encourage people to look at the world beyond India and to actually think of Africa or even some of the remote islands, Papua New Guinea or anywhere in the world. There's a huge population that can be served. And we can not only serve them, but we can also be leaders in trying to show. We have much in Indian culture, as you said, yes, that is of value that we are losing over a period of time. And it's time for us to capitalize on what we have, the strengths that we have.
What a compelling call for action that is. Dr. Anil Cherian is saying that we've got to expand our mind and look at ways of contributing to the world that we've never ever imagined before. And he assures us that we have it in us to contribute this to the world. But let's start by looking around us and seeing where we can contribute to build a happier place to live.